Hey there, how's it going? My name is B and I love to code the heck out of Squarespace and teach other designers how to do it too. That's why in today's video, I want to share with you a really quick and simple trick that you can use to be able to decide how many slides per row you get in your auto layout list when you have tablets or smaller screen sizes. Now, I know that this is a very specific customization, but because I've gotten questions about it in the past, I wanted to tackle it today so that you know how to face this issue if you ever come across it in your future projects. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so here I have my 7.1 site and I have an auto list set inside this section. Now this trick is meant for the simple list layout because this is pretty much the one that creates that issue or that doesn't adjust as well as the other ones for tablet devices. Now in terms of styles and options, there's nothing really that you need to set in here. The only thing is that I'm working with a maximum columns of 4. You could be working with a different number. And so if that's the case, the code is just going to vary very slightly for you. But apart from that, you're free to do whatever it is that you want with your auto section. So let's just go ahead and jump into the code. I'm gonna save this here. And then the first thing that I want to show you is what Squarespace is actually using to be able to set these 4 slides in the row the way that I have them right now. And the reason why we're going to look into that first is because by knowing how Squarespace is setting things up is how we're going to know how we can modify that for smaller screens. So let's go ahead and take a look here. If I inspect anywhere here inside the auto layout, we're going to see that we have a bunch of containers because these ones are really massive. So the important one, or the one that I want us to focus on, is this one called UL. So I'm just going to go ahead and scroll a little bit higher up to show you like where the section starts and where that container is located. So here you can see that I'm standing over this section, the one where you normally get the data section ID from. And so if I open this up for auto layouts, you're going to see that we have here a section background and a content wrapper, and this is pretty standard for all sections across 7.1. But then inside the content wrapper, what we have here, we have a regular content container here, and then we have a container called user items list. So this pretty much, when you see these keywords in 7.1, that pretty much tells you that you're looking at an auto layout. It doesn't necessarily tell you which layout you're working with or which auto layout the person is working with, but it does tell you that you're working with an auto layout. And then if we keep scrolling down, we're gonna find that UL container that I mentioned before. So this one is the one that is currently holding all of the slides that we have in this section. So it's just a matter of scrolling all the way down because this has a lot of code in it. And then here you can see that we have 4 elements. So these 4 LI elements, or as many as you have, depending on the number of items that you have in your section, is one of the slides that we have in the auto layout. Now, the way that these are set side by side are actually through the parent container. So if we go all the way up to the UL container as well, we don't have to scroll all the way up, but I kind of want to have it in focus here. So you're going to see here that on the right side in the CSS, we actually have a property here called grid template columns. Now this property is being used because Squarespace is using CSS grid to be able to build this layout. If we don't have CSS grid enabled here, or enabled, between quotes, if we don't have that display grid value applied, then we can't really use this property. But because this is what Squarespace is using, this is what we're going to override in our code to be able to make the changes that we want to make in terms of how many slides we have per row. So right now you can see that the value for this is a function called repeat, and it's set to for 1FR. So 1FR represents 1 fraction of the space. So basically what this little function with those 2 parameters is doing there is that it's dividing the whole space into 4 equal fractions. So if we were to change this number to something else, so let's say for example for 3, you're going to see how now that container is divided into 3 equal parts or 3 equal fractions. So this is the same thing that we're going to do inside our custom CSS window to decide how many slides we want per row depending on the screen size. So we're going to be using some media queries as well to be able to set those new values. Now, in order to target this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reuse the little selector that we have in here. Now, you can see that there's actually a couple of selectors here, and you know that it's a couple because we have a couple of commas here. So each comma is separating each selector, but the one that we're going to focus on is the one that is in black. The ones that are in gray do not apply or are not targeting the thing that we're looking at the moment, but the one that is showing up in black is the one that corresponds to the thing that we're currently looking at. So in this case, we're targeting the user items list simple. So this container, you can see here the class user items list simple. That has an attribute called data num columns set to 4. So this attribute and this value that we see here, it's taken from this other part of the code of the same container. So you see here data num columns 4. And this 4 value that you see here is the one that is going to change depending on the number of columns that you give to this section through the settings. So like I mentioned in the beginning, if you're working with a different number of columns, you're going to want to modify that number to match the number of columns that you're working with so that the code applies to your situation. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this, and I'm going to apply it in here inside my custom CSS window. And then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same property and just change the value. So I'm going to change that 4 number for anything else that I want to test it out first. And then what we're going to do is bring in the media query. So let's just go ahead and do here grid template columns. And then I'm going to set this to the repeat function. And then here we're just going to use something for now. All right. This is not going to be the final value. So I'm just going to go ahead and do here, let's say 21FR. There we go. Now, one quick thing about this function, the repeat function, and also the calc, even though we're not working with that, but if you ever had issues with that function before, it's because of the same reason. So because the CSS window is working with something called a less preprocessor, then there's this issue where these functions are not really interpreted the way that they should. So to be able to fix this issue, because you're going to see here that if I try to add important, nothing is really going to work. And then if I take a look in the inspect element tool, you're going to see here on the right side that I have my snippet there, but then we have this little warning sign that if I stand over it, it's going to tell me that I have an invalid property value. So again, because this is not really being interpreted the way that it should, we have here like an extra space in between the 1 and the FR that is making this value invalid. So you're going to see that if I were to edit this and then bring those things closer together, now the code works correctly. Now, when you're looking at the live side, the problem goes away completely, but because I feel like it's best to have the final result inside the editor, I want to show you how you can fix this issue. So basically what we need to do here is escape this function. So the way that we're going to do that is just by adding a couple of symbols. So we're going to add the tilde sign here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap those two parameters. So the number of columns that we want and the amount of space that we want them to take, in this case, 1 fraction, we're going to wrap all of that inside quotes. And once we do that, and I'm going to remove this important here and refresh the page because I have that inside the inspect element tool, you're going to see that by doing this, and now we're going to be able to have the final result that we have created inside our code. So that's just a little side note in case you want to make sure that you see the things as they should look inside the editor as well as on the live side for this particular function and for calc as well. All right, so let's go ahead and move on and decide which breakpoints we're going to be using and how many columns we're going to have for each of them. Now, before I start using random numbers, what I want to do is actually check out the breakpoints that Squarespace originally uses to see if there's one or a couple that are already going to work so that I don't have to overwrite them. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this, and I'm going to start shrinking things down. Actually, I need to disable my code first because otherwise I'm going to see the same thing at all times. All right, so if I start shrinking this down. All right, so here we have a media query that we can actually check in here in the same UL element that we've been tweaking all along. So here you can see how now with a min width of 768 pixels, Squarespace is setting 3 slides per row or 3 items per row here. And then if we continue to shrink down, we have this split into 2 here at 576, or starting from that point onwards. And then at this point, yeah, so here starting from, or under that 76 pixels, we have everything stacked into just one single column. So I think I like this breakpoint, and I kind of like this second one. I mean, I feel it looks pretty good. But now here, I don't really like how this looks with 3 columns. I think this is too squished up. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to start at that breakpoint, which I think it was what, 768? Yeah. So I'm gonna start my media query from 768 pixels. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna decide until when I wanna have 3 columns. Because I feel like here we could still have 3 columns and that would look right. And then, yeah, so I think I'm gonna choose maybe 1500. Yeah, I feel like at this point 3 columns would look good. All right, so my breakpoint is going to start at that minimum of 768, and we can actually see it here, it's just being crossed off. So it's gonna go from 768 pixels all the way up to 1500 pixels. During those screen sizes is when I want my columns to be set to 3 instead of 4 or 2 or 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, 768. Let's start with that. Media screen and min width 768 pixels and max width of 1500 pixels. So again, now in between those screen sizes is when I'm going to change that number of columns from 4 to 3. There we go. And so now if I open this up, I have my 4 columns here. And then once I hit that 1500 breakpoint over here, then everything switches to 3, which looks really great. And then that continues on until I hit that 768. Where is it? I actually feel like I could create another one because I don't really like the look here. Where is 768? Yeah. So until that point, we have 3 columns, and then everything goes back into 2 and into 1 the way that Squarespace was working with before. But I actually want to change this. I feel like from 768 all the way up to 1075, I want things to sit into 2 columns instead of 3. So I'm going to make a slight modification to the code here. I'm going to copy this. Now from 768 to, what did I say, to 1200 and something. I'm just going to make it 1200. So from 768 to 1200, I want to have 2. And then from 1200, because I want to start with this max width that we have here, but as a min width. So from that point onwards, I want to have 3. So it goes from 1 and then it goes to 2, and then it stays at 2 all the way up to 1200, and then it goes up to 3 until 1500, and then it just stays at 4. So if I save this and take a look, everything should work nicely. We have 4, and then it switches to 3. All right, that looks much better. And then it switches to 2, which looks great, and then it goes all the way to 1. Perfect. All right, and there you go. That is how you can easily change the number of columns that you have per row in your auto list layout when you're dealing with smaller screens. I really hope that you found this short trick super helpful. If you did, go ahead and give this video a big thumbs up. If you have any suggestions for future content, go ahead and leave them down below, and I will see you next time.